So I think I don't have a strong verbiage of identity. I have like a felt sense of identity, and I, whether or not I can explain it, I know what it is, and it is very contextual and relational. It depends on who I meet, and I'm open to a variety of different relationships based on who I meet, when I meet folks, how I meet folks, and the relationships. And I want to relate to people who can kind of be in that with me.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from all over the world to hear their personal journeys of self-discovery through the lenses of love, sex, and relationships.
Our mission is to show people that they're not alone and to inspire them to embrace their true selves so that together we can open minds and live authentically without shame.
We believe everyone's story is powerful and beautiful, yet it's important to remember that everyone does life a little bit differently and that the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we aren't doctors. Please consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Well, welcome to episode 376. We're Finn and Emma, and today, this is a fun one.
Such a delight.
Yes.
So many good vibes and positive energy in this. I'm excited for today.
So am I. Today, we talk with Molly. As you heard in the little snippet up front, Molly identifies as being very fluid and open in how she relates with people, and she walks us through her journey and how she got to where she's at today.
Yeah, and it goes way back. As you'll hear, Molly's been obsessed, her words, not ours, obsessed with relationships for a long time and just so curious. And she, as Emma said, takes us through her relational journey to where she is, and it's a beautiful story. So thank you so much, Molly, for coming on the show and for sharing everything with us and for the incredible work you do. For anybody who is curious, Molly will talk about this later, but she is a therapist and a relationship coach and one who is full of passion for the gig and right for it. So yeah, please check out all of her work. Links are in the show notes. Her business is called Bonobo Relationships, and you can find links over on our website at normalizingnonmonogamy.com. Click on the podcast tab where you can actually find show notes for this episode and all of our other episodes, which have links to everything we talk about, plus pictures of our guests.
For anyone who is a premium subscriber, we're going to jump right into the interview with Molly now. And for everyone else, we're going to go through a few announcements. First up, the premium subscription. If you're not familiar, it's a way to skip these announcements up front, but don't worry, we still share important dates of upcoming events in the outro. To sign up for the premium subscription, go over to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, scroll down on the homepage, and you can sign up right there for only $4 a month.
And the next upcoming event that you would miss hearing about if you're a premium subscriber,
Yes,
is our next virtual speed friending. These are events that Emma and I host every single month. We use Zoom to bring everybody together in a big Zoom room, and then we ask you a question and send you into smaller breakout rooms. You talk about it for a few minutes, and then we scramble the rooms asking you a question, and we do it over and over and over for about 2 hours. And hopefully at the end of it, you leave with a bunch of new friends and a smile on your face, and we go to bed happy.
Yes. Our next virtual speed friending event is coming up February 21st, 2025. You can sign up on our website under the events tab or on the banner at the top of the page.
I think it's purple this month.
Yes,
I think it's
so.
Purple most months because I don't change it. Next up, we want to remind you all about our virtual community. You hear us talk about it every month, and every week.
Every week, all the time. You hear us talk about it all the time.
Because we love community and we love bringing people together, and we would love to have you check it out if you're looking for like-minded, open-minded people who are maybe non-monogamous or maybe just in there to be with supportive, open-minded people. We've got a spot for you, and we'd love to have you check it out. We have monthly Zoom calls, we have men's groups, we have women's groups, we do workshops, and we have in-person retreats. Our next one's coming up April 25th to the 27th in Atlanta. There'll be more information about that soon, but we just wanted to poke you with it.
Yes, come join us in Atlanta in person. But to learn more and sign up for the community, go over again to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, click on the community tab, and there you can find everything you want to know.
And if there's something missing, you can always send us an email or a voicemail.
Yes.
We will happily tell you about it. The last thing we wanted to tell you all about on our website is under the resources tab. This is where Emma and I share many of the different resources that we've used over the years in our non-monogamous journey. And one of our favorites there is stdcheck.com.
Our favorite way to get tested for STIs.
It's our favorite way. We've been doing it for years, actually just about to go and do it again. But it's an amazing service. As we said like 10 times now, we've been using it for years. And when you use the links on the resources tab, you save $10, which brings the cost of a 10-panel test. A 10-panel test.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. Down to only $129, and that helps support the show financially. So thank you for everyone who has done that in the past and who is about to go do it in the future. We appreciate you.
A final reminder, reach out to us, send us a voicemail, send us an email over on the Contact Us page of our website. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to be a guest on the show, just like Molly, you can reach out and let us know.
Although we met Molly in person.
We did. We got lucky and met her in person.
So you can also do that if you happen to be in the Bay Area and you're at an amazing book launch for our friend Marie, who we mention in a few minutes.
Yes.
You would also run into us. And then you could come on the show that way. But an email works too.
The bottom line, reach out to us.
And with that, we're going to jump into the interview with Molly.
Let's go.
Welcome. Happy Friday afternoon. Welcome to the podcast, Molly. We're super excited to chat today. We know very little about you. We got to meet you at, here, a quick plug for Marie Tuin's book. We met you at Marie Tuin's book launch back a few months ago for What is Compersion? And, here we are making an interview happen. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Finn and Emma. It's so wonderful to be here. And it was so lovely to meet you at that. What a special event that was.
It was.
Yeah.
Marie just brings such beautiful people together. And it was such a warm space. And meeting you two, I just instantly felt such a warmth and connection. And so I'm so happy to be here with you all.
Yeah, it was amazing. That was a really fun night. So
I agree.
I'm glad we crossed paths.
For anyone listening who's like, ooh, what is that book? A link will be in the show notes.
That's
so you can go find that.
Go learn about
it immediately.
Yes.
So good.
Yes.
Amazing. Well, we've got you here today. We're going to get to pick your brain about your life and your relationships, and we're excited to do that. And to start us off, do you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So, hello, everyone. My name is Molly Ray. My last name has a bunch of silent letters in it, but it's just Molly Ray. And I am a relationship coach and therapist. I currently reside in Sacramento, California. I love it here. I've lived here for about 10 years. I am obsessed with relationships. I think I always have been. I can think back to being like a preschooler and chasing folks around the little yard trying to kiss them. I didn't understand consent and boundaries at that time. I was 3. It was the 90s. And I've just always been like interested in people and connections in a variety of ways. I'm really into mushroom foraging. And that's like one of my really fun hobbies that I think there's so much wonderful symbolism in mushrooms and mycelial networks, and that I love. And I think I as I'm saying that, I'm like, I think I really love this like anthropomorphizing of nature, because my relationship coaching business is called Bonobo Relationships, which is, of course, the bonobos, which are our closest evolutionary relatives, along with chimpanzees. But bonobos are like the cuddly, sexy ones, and not the like really violent, territorial ones.
Ideally, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Being a human is a complex experience, but we have the chimp and the bonobo inside of us for sure.
Right.
And I mean, I'm like queerness is extremely like deep inside of my soul. And that means so many different things to me, not just like who I love and am sexually attracted to, or romantically attracted to, but also just like an ethic of the world and questioning norms and challenging status quo, and really thinking critically about how we are in the world.
Yeah.
My pronouns are she, they. I'll end with that. Yeah. That's a little bit about me.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, you're lucky you're talking to two people who also love relationships and talking about them. So I think we'll have a good time
I
today.
thought you were going to comment on the mushrooms. And I was going to be like, whoa, I didn't know you were into mushrooms.
I loathe mushrooms. I pick them out of anything.
I love them too. So I'll go with you, Molly, but Finn would not be interested.
I foraged them out
can
of
I just
cooler at
say
the grocery
though,
store.
like, even if you don't like eating mushrooms, I totally get it. I like mushrooms, but I'm not like obsessed with them flavor wise. I mean, I think they're great, but it's like treasure hunting in the woods. It's so fun. Like the experience of like being like, oh, what's that? Like, it makes me feel like a kid. And like, even if you don't find anything, you're like, well, I got a good hike in.
Yeah, and it's like outside, fresh air, nice like scenery, like it's great.
I'm all for foraging in the woods. I'm not gonna eat the fruits of our labor. So
you
don't have to.
Foraging.
Yeah,
right. We can use your free labor and get more mushrooms for us. So we'll take it.
Yeah, happy to have you exploit me. Wonderful.
Anyway, relationships.
Yes.
Relationships are like mushrooms. Anyway,
actually, there's a lot of.
I mean, like ...
Yeah, right. I was like, we could go down that road.
Fill in the blank.
Let's jump in today, Molly, with what do relationships look like for you today? What are some of your ethos and ethics and where you're at today? And then we're gonna go back in time and we're gonna figure out how did Molly become the Molly we get to talk to today?
Yeah. What a small question.
We keep it bite-sized.
Today, yeah, totally. So right now I am single in terms of romantic relationships, and I am actively looking for a partnership and really feel very committed to that path for myself after like 2 years post breakup that was like really difficult and good and important, of like really delving into my relationship patterns, why that relationship was so hard for me. It was a breakup that I needed to happen. And I was like, okay, it's going to be fine. We're going to be friends. You know, queer people were always just like, let's hop right into friendship, which do not recommend, but I tried to do that. I'm all about like, yeah, you can be friends eventually, but I do think that there should be a little bit of time and space. Most of the time. And then like, a few months post breakup, I like really started going through it and just had a like dark night of the soul kind of year and a half where I just kind of was able to really see my relationship patterns, how they had like this relationship breakup was like kind of a catalyst to look at all of my relationships. So it kind of, I think, really signified a lot of, okay, what are my attachment strategies? What are my what are my quote unquote triggers or things that really, you know, affect me? Why is it so hard for me when I don't feel seen and understood that I feel like I'm going to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of like, I had a great therapist. I just, actually today was my last session with this shadow work coach I've been working with. So I've like really been like in it because I love like the personal work is very important to me as a person who does this work to, you know, do my own work along with it. And so, I'm finally at a place where I'm like, okay, I feel like I really feel like emerging into the world. It's really important for me to name just like the friend and chosen family community I have, because they are so lovely. Many of whom, not all, but many of whom are poly folks who like also do relationships differently. And some of us have dated or are dating or, you know, friends. So just like a really solid community of people. And I also feel like in this past year and a half, I've really like kind of shrunk down who I like, really intentionally, like discernment has been really important to me of like, who do I want in my life? You know, like I tend to skew extrovert, or have historically identified in that way. But now I'm like, maybe it's like, I still do get really like energy from people, both positive and negative, but I like really need to kind of protect that sometimes. And so, so I'm pretty protective of the people I spend time with. I think, you know, we'll get into the whole history, but kind of the recent how I got to this place right now where I don't really identify strongly with any particular relationship orientation. I can't in good faith say I'm monogamous. I just cannot and would not, because that does not resonate with me for a variety of reasons. I think mostly because just the culture of mononormativity is like absolutely not something that I am. And I think there's just like, I want to be with a partner or partners who like have an openness to challenging mononormativity. And that being said, I think as my kind of bandwidth for people and people's energy has kind of shrunk or become more intentional, I'd say sometimes like, well, I'm not monogamous, but I'm polysaturated at one, right? Which like looks like monogamy to the outside world, but like in my heart, I'm like, no, it's not, And what I really think it is at this time in my life is like I really want to establish a secure attachment relationship with someone, and then as relationships just flow through so many different phases and stages, like as that is more established, there's opportunity or discussions that could happen, but I think this gets a little into my worldview and things that I see kind of in I call it the non-monogosphere, like the just like the world.
I like that too.
The online chatter is there's a lot of like, this is the right way and this is the wrong way. And there's a lot of chatter. There's just a lot, I see people come into I see clients come in who are like, oh God, am I doing it right? Or like, I identify in this way, but then like there's this like, I think sometimes labels can narrow our vision, like tunnel vision us into a way where it doesn't allow us to see more nuance. And nuance is extremely important to me. And so I think labels feel hard, whether or not like elements of relationship anarchy do resonate with me or I don't know, just polyamory, or like I think non-monogamy feels broad, so I use that a lot to identify, but that word just like doesn't sit well on my tongue. It's just like it's like so I think I don't have a strong like verbiage of identity. I have like a felt sense of identity, and I, whether or not I can explain it, like I know what it is, and it is very contextual and relational, and like it depends on who I meet, and I'm open to a variety of different relationships based on who I meet, when I meet folks, how I meet folks, and the relationships. And I want to relate to people who can kind of be in that with me. So
it's such a beautiful example of the fact that like labels are the starting point of a conversation, which is something that Finn and I say all the time. At some point, you kind of need to like start with something to give some context and then dive in and be like, this is what it looks like for me.
Absolutely. And I mean, labels are so, like, as with everything, nuance, right? Like having that sense of, oh, I can find shared community because I now have a label. We could say label, we could say diagnosis, we could say identity category, right? Like there's so many things that words and having a name for something is so helpful. Absolutely. And it can sometimes be essentializing and sometimes be really limiting to like, oh, then now I have to identify as this, right? Like I know people who have like identified as lesbian for so long, and then they like meet a cis man, who they fall in love with, and they're like, what the fuck? And then they're like totally rocked because they've had this identity and I'm sure had really formative, wonderful, beautiful experiences in that lesbian community. But then sometimes, I don't know, the heart wants what it wants, or whatever platitude we want to use, right? Like you just fall in love with someone because of their personhood. And that can feel so disorienting because we've held so strongly to an identity. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a new level of beautiful exploration. But I think I'm at a place where I'm like, you know what? also, like, every time I've said, like, I will never, like, I swear that thing just, like, always happens. So, like,
Right?
in wanting to not be a hypocrite or be less of a hypocrite, I'm just like, you know what? Anything can happen. We're just letting things flow, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love what you said in there a moment ago about it being contextual. And I think that's a thing that, I mean, it's just so important, right? That's like, just, I know my examples can get weird sometimes. Like, say I'm a person who eats tacos, and then it's like, the only thing I'm ever going to eat from now on is tacos. It's like, no, that's contextual. Like, sometimes I go out and I like to eat other types of foods as well. And it just depends on sort of the mood I'm in. And so to say, well,
Yeah.
I'm in a phase where I'm into having one night stands, and it's like you meet somebody and you tell them that, and then they're like, well, that must mean we're going to hook up tonight. It's like, no, that doesn't mean that at all. That's just a thing I'm into, and I'm not, right? So it's just because we have a label or we're into things or they're part of us doesn't mean they're all of us. And that's the only thing then we're allowed to do. And that's the hard part about labels, is they can start to feel limiting. Like, oh, like you said, the long-term person who's identified as a lesbian and all of a sudden meets a man and they're like, well, what do I do with this? I can't be into men. I'm a lesbian, right? And so, yeah, I just appreciated sort of all your wisdom in this and your own life experience with it.
Yeah. 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 I think another thing is that labels can, or words or whatever it is, where you and another person are coming into connection and you're like, okay, well, I am polyamorous and they're saying they're polyamorous. It can be for better or for worse, but I'll talk about the for worse part, like a shorthand where you don't actually get into the like explicit naming of what that means to you. And then it can create these false expectations because you have an idea what polyamory means and they have an idea what polyamory means. And that's not, it's never going to be the same because we are different people. And so when we come, to me, like a lot of the work I do is making the implicit explicit, is to be able to take stuff from like assumptions into like, well, let's actually talk about this instead of just like using the shorthand like once we've established our shared and different kind of like the Venn diagram of understanding we have about a certain issue, then we can have shorthand language. But until we're on that same page, let's make things a little like, let's experientially and tangibly talk about it instead of just like, here's the word that means what I understand of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate you explaining that in that way too.
Yeah. I think that's something that is so important, right? Because you say you go on a first date and you're like, well, I'm polyamorous, so you're polyamorous. And you think, oh, we're marching down the same path.
We're aligned. We're doing the same thing.
And then you start talking about it. And I think that question of just, well, what does that look like for you, right? And then, one person might be like, well, I can fall in love, but I have enough bandwidth to go on a date like once a month. And the other person's like, I'm looking to fall in love and I'm looking for a nesting partner to move in because that's what love and polyamory mean to me. And it's like, we are not going to have a good time if we don't figure out some middle ground between us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's scary territory too. I want to know that I think sometimes it can feel safer to have language and not get into the meaning of it because that brings up difference, and difference is really scary, which is a whole other topic. But I just want to send a little love to folks who are like, wow, it actually feels a little intense for me to think about like having even to explain myself. I felt that before of like, oh gosh, I just say these words and now I have to explain myself. Like that feels intimidating.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of work that we can do on our own to really like explore our, like when we say I am this, what does that mean to you? Or what does it feel like in your body? And I think there's a lot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much here. I would love to dive into more of this and maybe we'll have time, but in the interest of time in this conversation, I would love to go back in your story and kind of discuss how you got here today. So maybe the good place to start is kind of, where did non-monogamy first enter your life?
I have this vision that it was on the playground right after you're like, okay, 4 years old, I figured out boundaries, I figured out consent, and I'm rocking.
Man, if that were the case, I would have saved myself a lot of trouble over the years.
Right?
Unfortunately, it was not as a 4-year-old. I was not that evolved. No, it was in college, like so many people. No, yeah. Well, I will go back a little bit further though, because when I said like I was always interested in relationships, I think I was always interested in sexuality, and I was as like a middle schooler, I was just like, I was a fucking horny kid, like I just like really wanted to make out with, at that time it was mostly boys, and explore. And I still maintain like that I was like coming at it from kind of a feminist perspective. Like, I look back and I look at like 12-year-olds these days. I'm like, oh my God, you are such a baby. Holy shit, what was I doing at that age? But also I still am like, no, like I kind of knew what I was doing. I don't need to get into the details of what I was doing. And it wasn't like terrible or not terrible. It wasn't, anyway, all to say that like I've always been kind of like interested in that. I will also say that I think there was a lot of like validation seeking in that, but that is another topic for another
They
conversation.
can all exist together. You can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it was empowering, and I think either morphed into or had a tinge of like wanting validation from being a sexual object. And there was both power in that for me and a little in reflection. I don't know if disempowerment is even the right word, but just like, complicated, nuanced, multifaceted.
I mean, that's being a teenager and human.
That is being a teenager.
Well, I feel like this is one of those things that gets such a bad rap, even like, especially as we get older. It's, well, you should just feel that in yourself. You shouldn't need that from anybody else. And it's like, hold on a minute. I can look in the mirror all day long and say the nicest things, but there is still something to having somebody else come along and be like, you are amazing. I find you really attractive. I'm
absolutely
right. Like to say, well, you should get all of that from your internal place. I call bullshit on that all day.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're relational beings. We need each other.
Yeah.
So that's kind of some context. So then, and I kind of like, especially in my later teens, was like kind of identified as like a slut. And really like that felt good and empowering. So then I was, I don't know, 19 or 20 thereabouts. And I had a roommate who was reading The Ethical Slut. This was 2007 or so. So, and she passed it along to me and was doing probably a very toxic version of non-monogamy, but it was 2007. But I read it and I was like just that mind blown, right? Which I think a lot of people have that feeling of like, this is a possibility. Also, like, I think again is kind of circling back to the identity part, like having a word, like finding that word for something that you've maybe felt or like hadn't even kind of known that was possible, and having it named is so powerful to be like, this is a thing. I could do this thing. People are doing this thing. How cool. And I was coming into my queerness at that time as well. And being queer, like falling in love with the first, female person, like, was not a surprise to me. I was like, yeah, this makes sense. I like people. Like, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, duh. I was a theater kid, like we're all oversexed kids, and so I found out about polyamory, non-monogamy, and I was like, oh man, that's totally like, that makes so much sense to me. And then I like wasn't in non-monogamous relationships. I had my first girlfriend, which was a complicated relationship, and she was a little bit older than me. And I think like there was this dynamic where she was like, that's just a phase. And I was like, oh, I'll probably, reproduce some parent-child dynamics. Yeah. And then I think I at that time, like, the theory of non-monogamy still like resonates so deeply, and I really am like I want attachment so much. Obviously those are not mutually exclusive, we know this clearly. Yes. And at the time I think I was just like, oh, people like me, so like I'm just going to be in these relationships and like we'll figure out the non-monogamy part later. Or like I was, satisfied enough where it just felt fine to not be non-monogamous. And then like after a relationship, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago or so, I was like, all right, from here on out, we're like, we're done. Like we're not going to be like, we're not going to be monogamous or like say we're monogamous. And I still found myself very much in like partnerships that were like either hierarchical, which I don't have a problem with hierarchy. We can talk about that later. People do. I don't. If it's explicitly named and expectations are managed.
Yep.
And yeah, I think I since then, like I've been in partnerships. I haven't. I wouldn't say like maybe there was like a few months where I was like, oh my God, I'm really doing poly, and it felt really good. But then I wouldn't say it crashed and burned. It's just one partner moved away, and then that was right before like my partner at the time and I split up. The like big breakup that caused the dark night of the soul that propelled me into a beautiful awakening. Is what
Love the reframe.
Both and. It is both and. I actually am like very grateful. And so I think like, yeah, I think I've realized in these past few years, I think I did that little nod to like the validation piece, because I think there was a part of me that was like, if I'm wanted by people, then that's validating. And now I don't need as much of that validation. I feel like I have a lot more kind of self-validation accessible to me, that I'm realizing like, I have learned so much from non-monogamy as like as an ethic, as a philosophy, as a queerness of challenging norms, and as and I hold that dearly, and that will always be a part of who I am. And I don't know if I have the bandwidth, like emotion or attachment relationships take so much work for me. And I think they do for a lot of people, but I will speak for myself that they it's a different channel, right? Like my friends who I adore and would be just like a puddle of goo without them, love and need and want them in my life. But it's not an act. It's not an attack. It doesn't tap into the attachment system for me in the same way. Generally, it has. I definitely have attachment friends, but like it's something that takes a lot of energy that I love expending, but I don't know, especially in like the initial phases of a relationship, right? First few years, if I have the space to do that with more than one person. And I think I just like am not as slutty as I have been, and I'm like realizing that like I'm not that kinky. I'm kind of like I'm not really like into casual sex. Like I've had like things have changed. I am a different person, and I'm like, God, I just kind of want to like grandma it up and sit in my little house and like talk and drink tea and like make out and have some sweet little sex. I don't know, like it just feels like as I've kind of like shed a lot of layers and kind of developed a new relationship with myself, just things have shifted and changed. It's been such a personal journey that I think is like, that is not necessarily what everyone or anyone does or should go through. I'm just saying that it is my journey. I like to name that because I think sometimes, I know in the past I'd heard people's stories and be like, oh God, am I doing it wrong?
Yeah.
And that's my own neuroses, sure. But I just like to name that, like, I do like this journey feels very personal. I don't extrapolate it to anyone else.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, each person's journey is so individual to themselves. And it sounds like you really non-monogamy you kind of were introduced to with the ethical slut back in college. And then you kind of went on this like 10 to 15 year journey of different relationships but learning more about yourself as you go, trying on pieces of non-monogamy in different ways and like seeing really what fit and what didn't. And along the way, like just that's what you like took all of that information in by kind of experimenting in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And feel like right now I'm at a place where who knows what the future holds, right?
Yeah.
Like I could see myself in like any kind of relationship configuration in the future. Like I know that there is possibility for anything. To me, it's more about like the open-heartedness to like, okay, whatever comes up. It's a confidence in being able to navigate things, if I were in a relationship and either one of us met someone or whatever, like to just be like, okay, if it's happening, it's part of the human experience. We can turn towards it and be with whatever is there, the difficult emotions. And like, it's an exciting, I think, place to be. Wow, there's so much opportunity. And in this moment, I know that I'm looking for a specific thing, but that doesn't mean that it's forever,
Yeah.
in any
Yeah.
kind of way.
Yeah, I love that, Molly. And I'm just, you touched on a minute ago, like how like personal this story is for you. And I'm just really grateful that you share it with us, that you're sharing it with us. And I think it just strikes me, you had shared early on when we asked like what your relationship looks like today and what you're kind of looking for. And you kind of said like, you don't necessarily want to use labels, but it's just sort of like a feeling of like wanting to be open to possibility, to what gets co-created based on the partnerships you're in. And I see that even all the way back into high school when you said like, well, I was kind of just being a slut and slutting it up and through high school. And I think, in many ways that's no different, right? You're just choosing at that phase what it is that you want and what works for you. And then in college, you tried out a little bit of monogamy with somebody who was sort of saying, oh, you're in a phase. And like, we're all just sort of moving through this, like what works for me today, what doesn't work, what feels good, what doesn't. And I think one of the ones that you throw out there is like getting into an attachment-based partnership. And I know this is where like in non-monogamy land, the non-monogosphere, as you brought up, it can get so divisive of, oh, well, you're hierarchical and you're attached and that's unethical and you're going to be exploiting people and hurting people. And that definitely happens and it can get really toxic. But that doesn't have to be how it is, right? It can be, I'm in a hierarchical attachment-based partnership with somebody, and I love that once a quarter we throw a tea party and make out with some people, right? That could be your vibe, and that's just as valid as, well, you have to go out on this many dates or you have to have 3 partners or any of the other stuff. Like, you get to do it your way. And
you can have you can have an attachment-based relationship and other relationships
that are not.
Yeah. Just like you have friends that are more attachment lens and then others that are not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also this assumption that when we in the like hierarchy versus non-hierarchy conversation, there's this assumption of exploitation that like, well, if someone isn't then going to have the same primacy, that like not everyone's looking for that. Like there have been times in my life where I've been like, dude, I want to be a unicorn because I don't want the attachment. I just want to like come in, have some fun, and then leave. And like I want to be like a fun little plaything, right? Like I kind of want to be objectified. So like maybe I want that, and I don't. And like I don't want the attachments that come with more of an attachment relationship. And I think that like knowing that there are, honestly, I think that I'll just say 95% of the time, throw out a random high percentage, anything can be done ethically if you're talking about it and expectations are managed, right? And so if you are engaging with consenting adults and you have the communication skills and abilities and you know yourself and know what you want and are able to express that and aren't coercive and then and are engaging with people who you can also trust that they are, ideally not. I mean, some of us are more susceptible to people please, right? There's so many dynamics in this to take into account, but there's so much more than this black and white kind of like, if you are doing this, it is always bad, right? Like, I just think that it's important and imperative that we communicate what our needs and wants are. And that's a lot of work. It is easier said than done to even know what those are. And they're influenced by so many things. Like, you can say all this stuff, and this is like deep, deep exploration to understand our needs and wants and what are culturally, or socialized kind of needs and wants, both socialized by like aggregate society, but also like socialized in the non-monogosphere where there's like, oh, well, I've been told that this is always good and this is always bad. Okay, cool. What do you believe? Right.
Yeah.
I always like to take cultural inputs and say, okay, what do you want to keep from that? And what do you want to kind of lovingly release? Because there's always going to be things that are like, I like this part of my culture of origin or family, upbringing, but like I really hate this part, and that's something I want to move away from. But it's not just this like fully everything about that is terrible and everything about this is good. It's like, what can we take and like and I think that what has shaped us and how can we there's a lot of good that shapes us, even if we have really tough experiences.
Yeah. I love that you said, that was what came to mind for me is so much of this, right? We're fed from the very beginning. You go find one other person. Ideally, it's a heterosexual relationship, and you do it until you die. And that's it. That's what you do. And so now all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute. I have to like talk about it. I have to acknowledge that what I wanted when Emma and I got together when we were 19, I don't want the same things that I wanted back then. And I don't imagine she wants the same things. And so we have to like keep updating the firmware and having conversations. Even in a monogamous relationship, you have to do that, but we don't.
Yes.
Right? We set our vows 20, 30, 40 years ago, and that should just hold true until we die. And I think, the path you've been on has been one of try this out for a little while. Now try this out. Maybe I took, a few things from that and a few things from this, and I'm going to put them together and try, whoop, that wasn't exactly what I wanted. And so I love that you said, like, sometimes I want to be the unicorn. Sometimes I want to be objectified. I think that's so valid, and it gets overlooked often because there's only one right way. And that's, unicorn hunting is terrible and bad. Nobody should ever do it. And if you are in a relationship with a solo woman or solo female, typically is where the unicorn comes in, then that's got to be unethical. You have to be exploited, and it's not the case.
Yeah, and there are trends, and we can look at those and acknowledge, power dynamics and systems of oppression and all of those things, are important elements and factors in this, and they are not the totalizing everything always, right? And really asking people their experiences of like, okay, well, you were a unicorn. How was that for you? Oh, it was terrible. Okay, for you, it was terrible, right? And yeah, maybe for 9 out of 10 people, it was terrible, but there is maybe that 10th person who it wasn't terrible for, and their experience still matters,
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe just to kind of bring that forward for you, whether it's the unicorn thing or any of the different ways that you've sort of moved through relationships, what are some of the things you've really taken away for yourself that you're kind of like grabbing pieces of and putting together for what you're hoping to sort of create for yourself?
What a beautiful question. I mean, I think the main thing is that just kind of openness, like open-heartedness and generosity of spirit and like self-awareness, right? It's like I think it's in one word, it could be like interdependence, right? To like each have like a person, 2 or however many individuals coming together, and each person is solid in themselves enough, right? We all have our insecurities and our shit and our baggage, right? But like but enough confidence to be able to, and like, security and trust developed in a relationship where that maybe we have, a certain kind of understanding of the relationship, but there's enough trust in oneself and in the other person or people to be able to say, I've changed. I want something different, which is terrifying, totally terrifying. And we can, I think, give each other corrective experiences of being a soft landing for those kind of historically terrifying experiences or feelings of like, I'm going to bring something up really vulnerable, right? Like I said that I wanted to be more monogamish, but I just met someone and I really like them. And like, I feel this attachment pull, and being able to say that. And I want to be in a, in an attachment relationship where that's always on the table, right? For things to shift. And that doesn't mean it won't be painful or that hard feelings won't come up, but there's enough kind of personal and relational capacity to handle that and to be a container for the hard feelings. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really about kind of self God, I hate the word accountability because I just feel like it's so overused, but here I am wanting to use it of just like, kind of having that personal, I mean, it's confidence and accountability and trust in self that like we can be vulnerable. And even if someone doesn't meet that perfectly in one moment, right? That we can sit in that pain and discomfort of a little bit of rejection, but also ideally where there can be a reconnect after that rupture, right? I think rupture and repair is such an important part of relationship work, and knowing that like the capacity for repair is really present in the relationship. So I think it's for me, it's not so much, I think this is clear, but like, it's not so much about the structure. It's about the process, right? It's the process of relating that is important to me. I think I've realized, again, not a binary, but like process versus outcome. Like I'm a process girly. Like I want the process to feel good, the outcome, outcome, whatever, but I'm like, what does the process feel like, So it really is like, what does it feel like to relate to you, to be held? And then whatever comes our way, whether that's people, experiences, health crises, whatever it is, we know that we can do it together.
Yeah. Or risk it, right? I think what you just touched on there, like
Totally.
the ethic of repair is so critical if you're moving through relationships in a way that you're going to take big risks and say, yeah, I know we were going to be monogamous for the next 6 months while we did whatever. We saved up for a house, but I went out and I met somebody and it's amazing. Can we talk about it? Knowing that might be a moment of, we now have to repair something. This is going to be challenging, but can we do that versus a learning that, oh, we said this is not okay to bring up. If I bring it up, it's going to be hard and there's no way to repair. The further you go down and reinforce that, it gets harder and harder to bring things up. It gets harder to talk about them and share the vulnerable wants, because you learn that the outcome is a challenging emotion that doesn't ever get repaired. And it's so hard to do.
It's having the courage to bring things up, but also the courage to like hear them and to be in that relationship.
Yeah. And to know that a huge relationship transition could happen, whether that's an ending of this iteration of the relationship, right? And I think that always has to be on the table. Like I would rather that be named and talked about and like, look, if this isn't working for you in like a very values way, or honestly, if this isn't working for any reason, right? Like, and when I say working for you, like where you're like, oh, this doesn't resonate with my, I don't know, soul. and it hasn't for a long time, right? Again, you want a little bit of distress empathy with people. I do that, like, it's not just like, woo, okay, I don't feel it right now, but like where someone is like, I've been sitting with this and for a year, this hasn't felt right, that there's also that ability to have a tender transition, and that doesn't mean, that really means looking and being with the pain of that, because transitions are really hard. But yeah, I really want to relate to people who can be with grief and who can understand kind of that grief is a normal, natural part of the world, and it's not the most terrible thing. Again, it can feel like you're dying, so it's really hard, right? Like I'm not I'm not trying to nip my grief, and we all have different relationships to grief, right? So like there's all of these conversations there's so much rich nuance in them, but like I think it's, when you enter into a relationship, you don't want it to end. It's not like that's the hope, but just that's a possibility, and that it's really about kind of both the relationship health, but also each individual's health. It's the both and of that. And a relationship can't be healthy if one person is not deeply fulfilled by it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's such thinking about the end of a relationship at the beginning of it is so, it's sort of
counterintuitive.
It's a bit counterintuitive, but I think it's a really important or powerful thing to do when it starts to feel like, okay, we're getting a little momentum here, to be like, hey, what do breakups usually look like for you? Or what do you expect if we're going to break up? What do you typically need? Right. And understanding up front, we don't have to be aligned, but we should at least know we're not aligned, right? That we know when I break up, I like to take 1 year of no talking. And when you break up, you like to immediately jump right into a friendship. We should probably know that before we go much further down this path together.
I love that. And it's hard because, especially in the beginning phases where you're just like ooey gooey.
Yeah.
You're
Like
just
all
like,
of the.
you're on drugs.
Right.
Yeah. You're
The
like,
new
why are we
relationship
talking about that? That's so sad. And it is, right? And maybe that's not the time, but when you're kind of ending the like NRE symbiosis, phase, having those real conversations, and I think that can actually be a really beautiful kind of like, it kind of takes it to the extreme of them like, how do we navigate conflict? Okay, we've talked about like the ultimate. Okay, so how do we like handle it when you do the dishes this one way and I don't like it, right? I don't know. Like I feel like it could be like, well, we've touched that edge, we've felt that edge. Ooh, okay, bring it in. Let's talk about cleaning the house.
Yeah. Well, and that like actually leads me to one of the questions I was going to ask you earlier, was around like some of the challenges you've experienced, or like the relationship challenges that have kind of guided you here.
I think it's easy to think that because we or you coach or work with people that we've just got it all figured out. And I sounds like that's not completely true on your end.
I mean, it's so interesting about a place where I'm like, I've been doing all this like theorizing and I feel so solid in myself. And I talk to myself, I'm like, bitch, just wait until you're in a relationship, like, cause that will like really put the pedal to the metal, like,
especially when you're experiencing new relationship energy and all the drugs.
Totally.
Like, oh,
like, I'm like, don't get ahead of yourself. Don't for your britches, love. Cause, we'll see how much you've grown when you're really in it. But I mean, I think a big thing was like people pleasing. It was like both people pleasing, but also like, I like to look at attachment as strategies, not like styles. And I can see like my avoidant tendencies, my anxious tendencies or strategies, and kind of what activates each part of that. And this, I think there was my sweet little mom is like, yeah, I'm repressed. I love it. And so like repression was a big thing. She's literally like, it works for me. And I'm like, that's okay, cool. But I like know that I have like, I can lean towards repression or like being afraid to share my own thoughts and feelings and wants and needs for fear of conflict, for fear of not being seen and understood. And I think there's such a deep need that I have to feel seen and understood, which is both like a common normal human kind of thing. But I've really explored my relationship to that and like when at times when I didn't feel seen or understood. And I think this past the relationship that like my last kind of attachment relationship was a really, really hard one in that realm. Without going too in depth, I think I really didn't feel seen and understood and supported, and like seeing how that impacted me and just like the big intense emotions and shutting down that I would then do, right? Like and not communicating, but like vibing out into the world in a very clearly communicated way, right? But like not using my words. And that's fine sometimes to be like, I need a minute, but I would just kind of hold things in and not talk about them. And like, wow, I think this I really do believe in I will say most dynamics, maybe not all, but in most dynamics, it takes two to tango. And there's always something to look like. We always have to look at our side of the street. And I think, after the initial pain of a breakup or a conflict, kind of ebbs a little bit, it's really important to look at like, well, what was my role in that? And I think I really do see how I participated in that, or even how I like kind of kept myself in my own suffering, right? like how it's so easy to be like, you did this and you did this and you did this. And also be like, well, why did I allow that for so long? Like what in me was so afraid of whatever outcome my brain thought that like I was like allowing this or dismissing it, So yeah, I definitely know like dealing with my sweet little people pleasing part has been, or not dealing with, tending to my sweet little people pleasing part has been that has been a huge catalyst for kind of a bunch of other things. But yeah, really, really looking at that was powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
And it's also relatable.
Yeah.
Very relatable.
I also loved what you said about, and it's a reminder what you said about your mom and sort of her approach to this stuff, because I think there's my therapist reminded me of this a couple of weeks ago. We were digging into something and she was like, because I was like, well, I made some comment about having to do this. She's like, you don't have to do any of this, right? And I think that's something that is easy to forget, that like we can move through the world. I think ignorance is bliss, right? We could shut it out and just coast, and probably I think some people that works really well for. And I think for me, I'm the type of person who's just like insatiably curious, and I cannot get that curiosity met unless I'm living the experiences, and then it shapes me and it feeds the next and it feeds. And so I really sort of picked up on that from you of it with your desire for openness. It doesn't sound like it's a drive always to like, I have a checklist. It's more like, I know that there is something out there that might come up, and I don't want it to pop up and have to be like, no, can never think about that again because of a relationship agreement or dynamic that says, we only look inward to our partnership. We don't ever consider the possibility of something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I really love that framing. And something you said about like, I really do believe that works for my mom. And I don't think that my way of being super curious, and I honestly, I say this very lovingly towards myself, like I'm neurotic. Like I am neurotically obsessed with relationships. It feels like very Jewish, which I am. It's like there's something like Jewish about the word neurotic. And like there's something that I'm like, that's not going to work for everyone, right? And there's I think that can also be this hierarchizing of like, you always have to be doing the work and like always self-exploring and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I don't think that you do. I think a little bit of that can be really helpful. I think understanding the self and understanding the self in relationship is important, but also like there can be great, wonderful, healthy relationships where that's not a huge priority. It is for me. And that's great for me, but it's not for everyone else. And I think when when you have a really strong sense of that, of like what is your style and type of doing things, it's less assaulting to your spirit when other people aren't doing that, because there's not like this, oh my God, am I doing it wrong? It's like, no, this is just how I am. And they are allowed to be that way. And that, like, I think that's part of the like opening your worldview, is just being like, oh, that is not for me. And that is okay. And allowing otherness to exist.
Yeah. I love that, just because I think what you said in there, that the trope that gets thrown out so often is, well, we want to do the work. We're showing up to do the work. And especially in the non-monogamous sphere, that's a very big thing. Like basically it's don't even come in the room unless you're planning to do the hard work. And I agreed that there is a lot more work to be done, right? Like this is often a harder way to move through the world.
Yeah, it's more complicated.
Maybe not harder in this sense, but it takes more energy.
No, it is.
Yeah, okay, it is.
I kind of tell people, I'm like, non-monogamy is like a super highway to all of your shit coming up.
Yep,
right,
because
for sure.
It is, right? And so like, I think there could be relationships where I don't really know what that would look like, and I do have a sense that like, it'd probably be pretty hard, but like, yeah, it's attachment stuff. It feels terrible sometimes.
Well, and at the same time, you don't, and I think what I've learned for myself, because I feel that way often, but I also have learned that there are times, whether it's days, weeks, months, years, that you can go, I don't have the fucking energy to do the work. So I'm going to do something different. I'm going to still maybe be non-monogamous or whatever, but I'm going to frame that with people in a way where I'm like, hey, I don't have attachment based energy today. We could go out on a date once in a while and it's going to probably stay pretty high level and fun because that's how much, and like, I'm here to do the work around that. Like I can show up and have the conversation. I can do all of the work that makes this happen, but I don't have the energy to do a different level of work right now. And I think being clear with people about that and being clear with yourself about that is important. But also, I think sometimes you don't know what level you have until you've exceeded it. And then you learn that, oh boy.
Yeah. That's learning too.
I think I can do this.
Yeah.
And then you get bitch smacked and you're like, never mind, couldn't do it. Thought I could do it.
But that is such an important point, Finn, about like, I often see people like they come and they're like, hey, we have agreements. This is great. And I think people see agreements and I think agreements and also like the theory of non-monogamy is like, that will prevent me. Like, I don't think it's a conscious thought, but like, okay, we have these, so that means pain won't happen. And it's like, no.
Yep.
Pain is going to be here and exist here. So really, I think a lot of my work that I do is like normalizing pain and like being able to like expand capacity for pain. And you also like, you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. And you don't know how you're going to respond to anything until like, if it's a first time that something is happening, I see so much of like, well, you said you would do this and then you did this, but it's like not quite the thing. Or like, even if it was, you didn't know, you just thought that would be the case. But there has to be, I just think there needs to be so much loosening of when we're talking about agreements, really. Like I have this document called like the spirit of relationship agreements, which is not so much about here are the things you need, but it's like, what's the ethic of entering into an agreement conversation, which is about like open-heartedness, not blaming, knowing that like being like allowing discomfort into the sphere. And I think that gets sometimes a little can be outside of the conversation where people really, of course, no one wants pain. We try to create containers and boundaries so that we don't experience pain, but I'm sorry, my loves. This is painful. Relationships are painful. They're beautiful and wonderful, and they are fucking painful. They hurt, and that's okay. And that also teaches us things, and we can sit with it. And like, I really try to kind of make a distinction between theory and practice, and being too much in the theory, I think can be a little detrimental. And it can also be a good kind of like, bowling lanes. What are those things?
The bumpers.
The bumpers.
Little bumpers. Yeah.
Thank you, Molly, for everything you shared. I know that we could ask you so many more questions, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to like, you just talked about, the theory and practice and all of that. And it just made me think this is a good time to give you a chance to talk about the work you do and to share that as well.
And we might have a few extra bonus questions afterwards. Well, awesome. I know I do.
I know. I'm like, can we just like spend the rest of the evening together chatting?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah,
I'm okay with that. Okay,
Heat up another 7 hours.
Got a glass of wine or tea or whatever, and let's go. So I have a relationship coaching business called Bonobo Relationships. I used to be on the Instagram, and then I started hating it, and so I still have like my body of work there, but I don't engage with it very often or ever because, again, that's a whole other conversation about my relationship to Instagram. So my relationship coaching business, I currently don't have space for individuals, but I do have a few more spaces for couples, or polycules, although I find that like mostly not a lot of polycules are triads or, quads come into the sphere. But yeah, it's all virtual. You can find me on my website, bonoborelationships.com, or at bonobo.relationships on Instagram if you just kind of want to get a sense of who I am. I do have a weekly newsletter that is just kind of like whatever thoughts come into my little head. Sometimes it's about relationships, sometimes it's about the human condition. And yeah, I always love hearing something about this conversation sparked you. Just like shoot me an email, or you can even DM me on Instagram and I will get it because I haven't deleted it from my phone. But yeah,
I sense
love
your
hearing
relationship with
people's
Instagram is a
thoughts.
complicated one.
Again, that could be a whole other conversation. But yeah, that's my practice. And I think a lot of my kind of values and ethics of how I work were really infused into this. A lot of nuance, a lot of being with things, turning towards painful emotions, sitting with them, expanding capacity, and both taking in the theory, but really looking at it critically and from a somatic lens, even of like, well, what about that really speaks to you? And what are your values around this? And how are they showing up? And also, there's relationship work is so multifaceted and dynamic. But those are,
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, links will be in the show notes, so nobody has to remember everything that you said. So they will find the links there, and we'll get them straight to you. And you have a few minutes. I mean, you just said you wanted to sit and have tea for the next 7 hours. So
I do.
you have a couple minutes to.
We're gonna have to schedule that like tea or wine date.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we should definitely hang out. But we'll pin that.
We'll hit record and we'll just see what comes out.
I love that.
Yeah, my question was around sort of your support community system that you kind of touched on it earlier, that you said you've got a whole lot of chosen family and people that are in your world, but not right now as not necessarily like partnerships, but sometimes maybe your people fool around and it's very amorphous, it sounds like. And I'm just curious, maybe just to talk about it a little bit more, like what does the community around you look like, and how did you build that, and what does it mean to you? What has it done for you as you've navigated relationships in a little bit more of a challenging path?
Another super simple question.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think while like romantic attachment relationships have had their challenges, relating to people has been usually pretty easy for me. I actually, there's a lot of love I have for my people pleasing part, because I think the flip side of the like people pleasing is also this really strong relationality and wanting to engage with people and make people feel at ease and feel comfortable. And so, I think I'm a very warm, welcoming person to others, and that has afforded me a lot of relationships throughout my life, relationships in just like the broadest sense of the word. And I think for a long time it was like, okay, well, I have all these people that like really love me and I or like me or whatever, and I like them. But now I think it's more like I have a little bit more discernment of like who I want to spend time with, people that I want to spend time with, and a lot of I think I have like, I don't have like one giant group that we're all like, I have multiple kind of friend groups. And even within those groups, there's like sometimes 3 or 4 that I'm particularly close with. But they're all like, I think the through line with all the like main important people in my life right now is that we are all curious, exploratory, looking at relationships. Again, the people that I choose to be with are like, quote unquote, doing the work, right? Doing some woo woo shit. I just had like 4 of my dearest friends and I did like a really beautiful grief ritual together. And we just all have different kind of grief things to grieve coming up in our lives. And so people who are just really intentional with how they move through the world. And then I also have some just like, legacy relationships where maybe it's not quite even that. I'm like, no, the people I'm thinking of are still depthful people or deep people. But there are some people that just our histories run so deep and long that they're always going to be in my, in my heart and people I connect with and have fun with. But I think it's really just, like, who do I want to connect with and who can I be vulnerable with? I think it's like, who has the space and capacity to hold my stuff? Because I can be an open book, but I can also, I can also go into therapist mode where I'm just focusing on the other person and not sharing of myself. And I can get people talking for a long time without having to to say anything myself, right? But I want people who I can and want to open up to. So yeah, I guess the cultivation of that has just been like kind of fine tuning over the years.
Yeah.
Well, and it's to me, it kind of, and it maybe just, I relate to this in many ways around sort of the curiosity piece. And I think there's something to having deep friendships that, sometimes maybe they like spike, right? Like we're going to go hang out for the weekend. There's a bit of energy built up before that, and it probably lasts a couple of days or a week after. And then, things sort of come back to a equilibrium. But there is like an ability to like have, even if it's just a deep conversation at lunch, right? Like that satiates parts of my brain that I'm like, okay, I don't have a desire to go get into another attachment based relationship because I'm getting some level of depth here that I, used to think, well, I only can go and talk like that with my wife or somebody that I'm going to be with forever and ever, versus like, no, it could just be a really beautiful, intense lunch. And that's it. Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just the way when you start playing with this, like, how do we relate to people? It opens up like a whole different world of, okay, this is what's possible. And maybe this friend, it's possible. That friend, definitely not. But they're not any less valuable. But we're just not going to have the same conversations at lunch.
Yeah. And same with there's phases. There are moods, right? Sometimes I'm like, in general, I'm not one to like go out a lot these days, right? Going out, whether it's a bar or a random party or whatever. But there are moods that I have when I'm like, ooh, I'm feeling a little, like I want to go small talk and meet a bunch of random people today. Like that feels good. It's rarer and fewer far between than it used to be. But like that can strike and I'll be like, all right, I know who to text to be like, what is going on? Because they are connected and plugged into all the cool, queer, I mean, it's Sacramento. So I think it's cool. I love Sacramento. I do. But like plugged into what's going on. And yeah, I think it's just like fluidity and flexibility with myself and the world around me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been such an amazing conversation.
I know. I love that so much. And I love the whole conversation. It's been wonderful. And thank you so much, Molly, for everything that you've shared and for just all the work that you do too. And just the information you put out there, the work that you put, work with people one-on-one and in couples. And it's so important and so needed. So thank you.
Yeah. Same back at you. You all are doing really incredible work. And normalizing is one of my favorite concepts, and the fact that you're, 307, some large 300 number in to getting so many diverse stories of how to relate. I think it's so important. So yeah, I really appreciate you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. And look forward. Oh, go ahead.
I would say before we let you go, is there anything else that you would like to get out there?
I don't think so. I feel full and content with this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we will definitely make it happen again because this was delightful and we look forward to that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Molly.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Yeah. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye.
We'll talk soon.
Bye, everybody out there in the world.
And we're back.
Perfect harmony.
I don't know if I'd say that, but
You don't have to. I already said it.
Anyway, we're back. Thank you, Molly, for coming on and sharing today. It was lovely to talk with you, and we're really excited about the work that you're doing as well. A quick reminder for anyone listening, go to the podcast show notes in your podcast player or over on our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, and check out all of the amazing work that Molly's doing.
And just echoing the gratitude from my side as well. Molly, thank you for coming on, for sharing your story, and for, again, all the amazing work you do. And excited to keep bumping into you around the Bay.
Yes. A quick reminder to everyone as well that our next virtual speedfronting event is going to be on February 21st, 2025. Mark your calendar. We'd love to see you there, and go sign up on our website.
And next week, we've got another interview.
Wait.
I remembered just as you remembered. This Friday, we've got an Ask Us Anything episode coming out. So you'll get to hear me and Miche talk about NRE and something else breaking up. I couldn't remember for a moment there. And about breakup.
It wasn't part of the conversation, so I can't help you.
Yeah, get out of here, Emma. So we'll see you on Friday for that. And then next week we have an interview for the astutest of astute listeners. You might know we told you that this current week was going to be Elena. We said that last week.
We did.
And now we're going to say it again. Next week is going to be Elena.
And it's really going to be
And it's really going to happen. Unless it doesn't, and then it'll be the following week.
Wow, way to get their hopes up.
I'm just being a realist, but I'm 99.999% sure next week you're going to be listening to Elena.
Yes.
And with that,
I think that's everything.
I think that's everything.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.